especially in these times, having uninterrupted time to focus on something about which I'm passionate is so extraordinarily valuable. So thank you so much for this opportunity. It was really wonderful in so many ways. So I will talk a bit about my project with a bit of a focus on the components of it that I was able to tackle since I've been here since last Monday. But please, by all means, at any point in time, if you prefer me to talk in more detail about something, ask the questions that just say, Sharon, hey, can you say more about that? I did make a bit of a PowerPoint, but it's mostly because I'm a teacher and I'm used to making PowerPoints, but I'm also mindful of issues around of accessibility, and for some people listening, sometimes you miss a word, and maybe being able to see it on a slide is helpful. So I'm also happy at the conclusion of this to share this PowerPoint with you if anybody didn't hear something or wants to follow up on anything. So my project is tentatively titled Teaching and Learning in Pandemic Times, and I thought it would be helpful for you to just have a sense of what fuels me both as a creative artist and as a scholar. And I would say these are the two questions that continue to both inform my practice and the things that really excite and interest me. And the first is, how can theater and performance be sites for building community and engaging in civic dialogue? And the second one is, how can theater and performance expand our capacity to imagine a more just and equitable future for ourselves and for others? Because after all, theater is an imaginative practice, right? We use our imaginations, we create worlds, we observe worlds on stage. How can we leverage that to imagine a more just and equitable future? So a bit of a project timeline I'd like to share. Well, we have a new member joining us. Hi. Hello.
Hi.
Oh, you know, Hillary. By the way,
It's
did you
Hillary.
know, I did see a snake yesterday.
Oh, did you?
It was not a rattlesnake,
Oh, good.
but it was enough to deter me from walking in the woods today. Let's just say that. That was, yeah.
You came. Everybody, this is Hillary, who is our ranger up at Tao House, our head ranger.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so glad you came.
Yes.
There's a chair there, or you could sit
at
down
the
there, but
table.
you wouldn't see. If you go down there, you won't see the.
Okay.
Yeah. So get one of these ones.
Yeah, well.
So a bit of a timeline, you know, of course you all know, I won't start at the beginning of COVID, but what I will tell you is, at some point during COVID, I was teaching remotely, and as I mentioned, I have a neighbor and a colleague who lives directly across the street from me, who's a faculty member in sociology. She was doing the same, and 2 doors down, I have a neighbor and a friend who's a middle school teacher. And at some point, while we're all, stuck in our houses and teaching remotely, and, we decided that every day we were going to take a break at 5 p.m. and go for a little walk together. So we would do that, and every day we talk about different things that were happening, different in our lives. We all also had school-aged kids who were learning remotely, and it was really through a series of stories that my neighbor and friend who teaches 6th grade language arts was telling me that made me think, oh my gosh, I hope we remember this. The stories that you're telling me, the things that you are doing, I hope we don't just say the pandemic is over, now let's move on. I say, I hope we remember this. And that was really the seed for my interest and engagement in this project, was this idea that I was watching teachers trying to do their jobs in really unprecedented circumstances, and the lengths that they were going to in order to connect with kids, be mindful of mental health, trying to actually teach their content areas. I thought, we need to preserve this. And then it took me a couple more months before I thought, I could be part of that. I could be part of preserving that. I was teaching in I teach 2 classes in which I often include a unit on documentary performance. And the most recent time I was teaching that, I thought, was thinking about the stories my colleague was telling me. I was thinking about documentary performance and why people engage in that genre. And I thought, I could do this. That's my calling. I think that's what's going to happen. So in the summer of 2022, after I received IRB approval for my research project from Davidson, I hired 3 student research assistants, and they worked with me to conduct a series of interviews. So we were quite open to interviewing anyone who worked in a school and did some kind of teaching, whether they were a classroom teacher, an assistant, whether they ran the special education program, whatever it was. And so I spent last summer conducting interviews, simultaneously trying to do some additional contextual research, collect some data. There was a lot of conversation at that time about learning loss, right? Were students actually learning during that remote period, and what were going to be the consequences of the learning loss? So I was doing both of those pieces of research. And of course, then the summer ended, and my full-time job began again. And I have 2 notebooks, right, like this. So these are my research.
You were teaching remote yourself.
I was teaching remotely in 2020, 2021, that academic year. Davidson College was like 90% remote. I held a handful of in-person classes, but we're a residential college. We had students on campus. So even though technically the bulk of my teaching was happening through Zoom, I was meeting in outdoor locations like this with students.
But outdoor.
Yeah, outdoor locations.
Even in the winter.
It's temperate there.
Yeah, it is somewhat
Yeah.
temperate. I do recall there being a handful of in-person meetings, but we were subject to a series of rules that were quite cumbersome. If we were going to hold in-person classes, we had to be 6 feet apart. We had to disinfect our classrooms before we went in them and after we left them. There were like all of these rules that in some ways made it quite difficult, especially to teach my discipline. In any event, so I had to put my research on hold when I went back to teach in fall 2022. And then next bullet point, I like this bullet point, Florence calls to tell Sharon the good news. Let's jump straight to that. So Florence calls me and says, Sharon, I've got good news for you. And I'm super excited because I knew what that meant was that I was going to be able to return to my project. So I began at that point kind of thinking about what did I want to tackle in the 2 weeks that I was going to be in residence here. And then here, 2 weeks, Sharon works feverishly on what's happening, feverishly. And I am happy to report that I printed out at the end of Wednesday, I printed out a very rough first draft. It's a template of the whole thing. And then I spent time today and yesterday kind of going through and just picking some bits that I wanted to continue editing. So I thought it might be interesting for you to know what are some of the materials that I've included in my documentary play. So I actually arrived thinking that I was going to write a 4-person play. I was going to write a play that utilized 4 actors, and I had in my head that what I was going to do was try to create a series of sections of the play, each of which kind of focused on a particular problem, experience, etc., that had emerged out of the interviews. And in fact, as I started working on it, while I've been here, I realized I needed 6 actors. So I've written a 6-actor play with 11 scenes, and the materials that are include verbatim text from the interviews that I did last summer, and then various newspaper articles, some of which, are in popular press newspapers, the New York Times, that reported on things like learning loss, what's going on with teachers in the classroom, mental health issues, etc. And then I also had collected more in-depth reporting and more detailed data and statistics generated by a series of different research sites and research projects that were a bit more meticulous in their collection of data. Specifically things like a study that looked at the mental health of teachers post-pandemic, as well as as students, and then a series of studies that are being generated out of this research project, the Center for Educational Policy Research at Harvard, that was really looking at they're really trying to quantify the learning loss resulting from remote learning in 2020, 2021, and then try to propose a series of solutions of how to compensate for those losses. So all of that material has been integrated then into the play. This is just a generic slide. I talk with my students about why would somebody be interested in documentary performance? Why that genre? I've been drawn to it for a variety of reasons, and there are a couple of individuals whose work has really inspired my own, most notably Anna Devere Smith. Don't know if you know Anna. Do you know Anna Devere Smith? She has a more mainstream. She's had mainstream success as an actor, but her series of plays, Fires in the Mirror, Twilight Los Angeles, have been really inspirational to me for this project. And so for me, this idea of documenting the history of a specific community, in this case, the community of education and educators, and the impact a specific event has had on that community. So really thinking from both the perspectives of teachers and students, what sort of the long-lasting impact of COVID, and not just COVID, right? Not just the disease, but the ways in which society was impacted by COVID, right? There's a multitude of ways, right? Health, economic, social, cultural. Whoopsie. Yeah, you might be asking, but Sharon, why'd you write a documentary play about this subject? And I say to you, why? I think I said this at the beginning, but to me, there are several different strands that weave together to inspire my interest and engagement in this particular issue. The first is, there certainly was a lot of focus and attention on the way in which healthcare workers were described as frontline workers during this time period, and absolutely they were, and the impact on in that field is tremendous. But I feel like I know more about education, educators, and teaching. I know more about that field. I felt like I could approach this particular constituency from a more informed, through a more informed lens. So I don't want to forget. I think what I hope my documentary play does is, in a way, memorialize the labor, effort, and impact that COVID had on education and on educators and students. And, at the same time, I am mindful. I do not know what is true in your state, but in the state of North Carolina, teachers are grossly underpaid. And so we ask a group of people, right, who are grossly underpaid to bear the brunt of the pandemic in really unique ways, and without any additional compensation for that labor. So I think between students who attend affluent schools and students who attend less well-funded schools, and as researchers have said, it's not simply the fact of attending a less well-funded school that is the cause of the gap in learning loss. It's the matrices of that student, perhaps their parents were frontline workers or were quote-unquote essential workers and had no child care and couldn't supervise their kid during remote learning, right? So there's a multiplicity of reasons why students who attend less well-funded schools have now, even 2 years hence, still exhibit more statistically significant learning loss than kids at more affluent schools. And that the kids at the more affluent schools, those schools were able to deploy a bunch of different strategies in the subsequent 2 years to address those learning losses that the high poverty schools were not able to. So I think, interesting things that I've learned. I think we're not over it. Schools have not bounced back yet, and schools are not going to bounce back if we just move forward with business as usual. That's what seems pretty clear to me. So what I tried to do also in some of the the stories from the interviews and the verbatim texts was to find moments or stories that, rather than said, you know, the data and the facts, like, hey, kids at poverty schools, they're doing worse, was to capture that through a story that was shared. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, oh, see, it's me. This is me. This is, see, I took the pictures. So maybe I've already addressed what I've done here, but I just started making a list of here's what I came with, and here were some of the like nuts and bolts kind of tasks in which I engaged. So as I said, I came with 2 notebooks, piles of research. And what I started with was just reviewing my materials and, you know, making lots of notes. I have lots of, I'm a big fan of these little, you know, little sticky things, right? Doing a lot of highlighting. I came with like a pack of 5 highlighters and color coding things. What I was looking for was, I was reading all the material and really trying hard to listen to moments where different people were talking about issues that seemed to echo or resonate with one another. Because what I wanted to try and do in the structure of the play was to structure it so that there would be like discrete scenes that obviously dealt with different and specific issues. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So I would say I spent the first 2 days just reading and underlining, and then when I felt stuck, I would go and take a little walk, and that was actually great for me, for my process, because what I found was I would read and I had all of these stories in my head, and I was struggling sometimes to parse them and categorize them. So I would go on a walk and step away from the material and look at beautiful Mount Diablo and get some inspiration, and then come back with an idea and, you know, scribble it down, right? And so that was great for me, was that I not only had the uninterrupted time, but when I needed to kind of take a moment of reflection and a break, I knew I could do it silently, right? As opposed to, like, if I'm working in my office at work, if I get up and I walk out, you know, there's 100 million people, right? All of a sudden people are asking me about unrelated things, and so when I need a break, I'm not actually getting that break, right? I want the fact that I could get a break but stay hyper focused on what I was thinking through, like the thread of an idea, was extraordinarily valuable for me accomplishing something these last 2 weeks. So I just, so this is sort of how I started. You see, things are kind of color coded. So each actor, you know, in my Word document, I started off with each actor being a specific color. What I tried to do, let me fast forward to. So what I ended up with in the play, I was kind of trying to suss out whether it would all be the same, would I have different structure, would I have scenes that were slightly different, and what I ended up with, and it'll change because this is just a first draft, but what I've ended up with is 11 scenes. 3 of those scenes are statistics. They're not voices of particular individuals. There's one scene that's statistics about learning loss, another scene that's stats about student mental health, and a third scene that's stats about teacher mental health. Then there are 2 monologues, so they're longer narrated stories. There's one, I call it a duet. They were not actually talking, but as I kept rereading these 2 particular teachers' interviews, I felt like they were talking to each other. So I found this way of kind of weaving them together into a duet. And then 5 scenes are what I call choral pieces. So they each have a specific topic. So the opening scene is titled, you know, March 2020. And it's, you know, multiple different voices. And I was looking, you know, for ways that those voices, again, were either sometimes repeating ideas, right? Different people were saying the same thing, but in a different way, or places where they resonated interestingly with one another. So right now, the play has those 11 scenes. I'm not sure if the monologues are too long. This is what I was struggling with actually this afternoon, is I was rereading the 2 monologues, and I think one of them is it's too long. the story doesn't carry the length of the scene the way it is now. So I'm going to keep working on that. I'm toying with the idea of having a narrator.
Oh, I was going to ask you that.
Yeah, that is not, doesn't introduce every single scene, but provides maybe a little bit of historical background at a couple of points throughout, right? I just don't know if I want that to be a seventh actor or whether I want one of the 6 actors to sometimes be the narrator. So I have to figure that out. And then rhythm. The piece that's really difficult when you're sitting with your own work is, again, is this monologue too long? Like, I find the story compelling on paper, but when someone's reading it, does it sustain interest and engagement? And that is really tricky. So yesterday I was thinking about recruiting a couple of my students who are on campus this summer and seeing if they'd be willing next week or the week after to join me and just do a read aloud, table read.
Good idea.
So I'm going to see if I can do that. They're not the right age, to be honest. Like, there are several of the characters in this piece who talk about, I'm close to retirement. Right? But that's fine. They can. I think the students can still read the words, and I can still hear them out loud. It doesn't. That piece doesn't really matter. So I'm thinking that tomorrow I'm going to shoot them an email and see if I can bribe them with some pizza to join me and read it out loud, because I feel like that's the next. That's the next bit of information I need to take the next step in working on revisions. And I said, and ta-da, I have a draft of my play. Whoops, I have a draft of my play. And would you like?
Yes.
Yes. Shall I?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Fabulous. All right. Let me get it.
This is a great topic. Like that. This is.
Oh, you do? Okay. So I wasn't sure. Let me tell you, I heard the word salon and I was thinking Gertrude Stein, and I was like, which one of you is Gertrude Stein?
That's Florence. She's not here.
Your house, you're hosting, that makes you Gertrude. I don't know. But
We turned around and all of a sudden the get together was a salon.
love it.
And we said, it is a salon.
Well, it's
Part of
Florida.
the idea was
It's as
for
close as we're ever gonna get.
Oh, was it? Oh. Yes, I meant to tell you we'd like you to read a bit, so glad you're doing
love the idea of a salon.
Nice bird, really is.
Yes, when I was in college, and I remember reading, about that early 20th century,
Oh, yes.
Gertrude Stein Salon, and I just have always been quite nostalgic for that. Who wouldn't? I mean,
And why couldn't I have that experience?
why couldn't I have that experience?
How,
Okay, so
how
I'm
long
gonna-
is the play going to be?
What?
How long?
What a great question, Wendy. What a great question. Well, I should have said, and I'll say this before I read the monologue, one of the things that I'm quite interested in general, is creating, let's say it's a double, no, I don't want to say 2 acts, but in creating a companion experience. Now, some people call these things talkbacks. I don't like to use that word. I don't like talkback because I feel like it's a little insulting to the writer. People are talking back to your work. Post-show discussion, I'm cool with. Right? But I have been mulling over, if I were to have, if there was a performance of this, what would I want the post-show experience to be? So just one small example, and then I'll read this monologue. I have, the last 2 years, I have facilitated a social justice theater troupe on campus with students. And each of our performances, we've done exactly that. We've done some performance, and then a community engagement activity, which invites the audience to participate in a thoughtful and creative way. So not just raise your hand and, have a little discussion, but there's an actual activity that in some way asks you to think about and respond to whatever the meaty issue of the performance was.
We've done that at Tao House.
Yeah.
When we did Long Day's Journey, and tonight we could take a sticky note at intermission and write down 6 words that you're thinking about because of what you've seen.
Yes, I love that. I love that. I love that. That's,
Well,
that's
and
more
all your
meaningful.
COVID things, everybody experienced it,
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
so everybody will have,
Yeah, right.
yeah, and
No,
then
right.
I think we've all known teachers
Right.
who retired struggled.
Yeah. Yeah.
And grandchildren who struggle.
Yeah, teachers and grandchildren.
Oh,
Okay, so
go
this
away.
monologue is called "Damn Yankees." You'll yeah. I try. The thing that I'm unsure of when I do it in performance, I interviewed all these people, so I know their personalities, so I can channel that personality, like the energy, right? But what's going to happen when I have other actors do it? I'm not sure. Okay.
But
So
O'Neill
again-
liked directions. I mean,
Yeah.
you read his play.
Yeah.
I have a play, all this, how to act, and then yeah.
Well, I will tell you when the monologue I'm about to do, when we were done interviewing this teacher, she was one of there were I think 3 or 4 people that we actually interviewed in person. Most people, we gave people the option of in person, and we would come to them, or they could come to us, or on Zoom. She came to us, and all 3 of my student research assistants were there that day. So we all sat around a table, and we were captivated by this woman and by her energy. And when she left the room, I said to my students, "I'm playing her." So, okay. Okay, so in fall 2019, I decided we were gonna do a musical that was sports focused called Damn Yankees. So you see, we had gone in my school from having a very veteran principal of like 40 plus years to somebody who had been an assistant principal, not having had a principal position before, and thinking he was more of a dictator than a leader. So in the first meeting I had with him, I was like, oh, I do a musical every year, this, that, the other thing, blah, blah, blah. And he literally said to me, well, musicals and the arts, that's just not my thing. So, I kind of knew instantly he was not going to be a person who understood the things that we taught in the arts or how we taught our students those things. So I knew that I was going to have to find a way to get him to understand. So, damn Yankees. And he's like, wait a second, is that musical about baseball? Uh-huh. And he's like, oh, well, that's interesting. Yeah. And then the world shut down. We had gone from November to March 11th, 2020, and we were in Tech Week. Costumes were on. Pit was in. Lightboard was programmed, and we were ready to go. We were supposed to open on March 16th. And then we got the letter from the superintendent, I think it was like maybe March 12th. All after school, anything. Canceled until further notice. And then, of course, the theater teachers were like, but wait a second, what about our performances? So emails started flying, and nope, everything canceled. This is canceled, that's canceled. Gosh, I let my students finish their rehearsal, and I had to stand up in front of them and go, due to unprecedented conditions, blah, 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 yada, yada, we're gonna put our show on hold. We are not canceling it. We are putting it on hold until we're permitted to perform again. And the kids are thinking, okay, cool, like 2 weeks tops. All right, let's shoot for April. We can do that, no big deal. Reschedule. Well, and then, by April, well, the bottom fell out. So, obviously we didn't get to do a show that year or the following year. So this past March 2022, I revived Damn Yankees because you know what? We still have the rights to it. We still have the rights. I paid for them and we still have the rights. So in November, I was like, mask or no mask, we're doing the show, y'all. It's been 2 years. I've been doing this show for 2 years. The stage floor is painted and the set is done. Now, of course, I had to recast the show. I lost, I think in total, I think there were like 8 students left. And you know what? We got a lot of pushback from the parents of the kids who were remaining. They're like, well, why can't you do a different show? Our kids already did Damn Yankees. And I was like, yeah, but they didn't perform it. And that set's built. And I'm not buying lumber. I can't do it. I don't have the money for it. You know, the cost of lumber right now, that is no joke. And honestly, in tribute to those people that didn't get to do it, I feel like we need to do it for them because they didn't get to. And all of us, we didn't make any money on a previous show. So where is the money going to come from to purchase the rights to another show? Or the set? So you know what we did? We invited the original cast to come back and see it. And at the end of the show, after the curtain call, my cast stood on stage and they sang the chorus of the main song and they asked the whole original cast to stand and be recognized. Oh my gosh, every night I was a mess. I was just crying. My choreographer's crying, you know, parents were losing it. It was really nice to recognize them in that way, you know, for being part of it and for making it what it was. And I thought, you know what? This is one thing they're going to remember through COVID, you know, that we persevered and we did the show. We tried, we lost half our people, but we turned around and we did it again. And we did it for the people who didn't get to do it. And we had almost everyone. I think there was like maybe one either cast member or member of the pit who didn't come back to see it. Just one. But you know, there was this student in my cast who lost his father like the week before our show. Oh my gosh. I don't know if it was COVID. I don't know. But he was a senior and you know, this show, it was the only thing that he wanted to do. He didn't go to school. He couldn't. Like, he just couldn't. It was just too hard for him. But he came to rehearsal. And he came to tech rehearsal. And he opened the show, you know. And so it was a really hard thing for him. He was one of those, like, strong, silent kids who didn't tell anybody about it. And his mom showed up opening night. And like, she just couldn't even talk to me. She was like, no, can't. And I was like, no, it's fine, because you know what? The father's funeral was the next day. Oh God, it was awful. It was awful. But you know what? He was there. He was there every single show and on every single night. And he never missed a line and he never missed a cue. Nothing. Because that show, that was his consistent. Like, that was his only thing that he had. And you know, that's why I do what I do. Because it's always somebody's thing. And that's
Oh,
it.
that is terrific.
Where was the teacher from, may I ask?
North Carolina. So here's what I'll tell you a little bit about how we ended up interviewing the teachers that we interviewed. We did interview a lot of local teachers. I did because of the IRB approval process, I was limited in the kind of recruiting I could do for participants. So I had my students, my research assistants, we had a flyer with like a QR code on it, and I sent them out to like all these schools in the area. So they like would go out each day and bring a bunch of flyers. Maybe they went out to like 15 different area schools. And I welcome teachers that taught at any level. So elementary, middle, high school, any level. So we got quite a few teachers that way. And then what happened was one teacher we'd do an interview with them, and they were like, oh, that wasn't so hard or intimidating. I'll tell my other friends, you know.
Yeah.
And so we got some other teachers that then came that way. And at some point, when we weren't getting a lot of people to sign up, one of my students had what I thought was actually a pretty brilliant idea, which was to go through Davidson College's alumni relations and contact Davidson alum who were teachers but lived anywhere else, and just say, hey, I'm a Davidson if you know anything about Davidson, you know that there is a tremendous and deep loyalty. Students feel a real sense of connection to the place. So my students would send an email out to this person, oh, I see that you're a teacher and here's this research project. Would you be willing to let us interview you? So any teachers that were not from the New York area, most of them we got through that process. They were alums, and then again, they would tell a friend, right? So, but I would say the majority of the educators that I interviewed were from North Carolina.
How many interviews?
Oh my gosh, I'd have to look back at my records, maybe like 25 or so.
Did you find the experiences at the different levels of school were different?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that the kinds of problems and the way that learning loss manifested were age appropriate, if you will, right? So most of the teachers that taught middle school and high school, when they talked about coming back, and so again, this was summer 2022, so I asked them about their experiences in March 2020, I asked them about their experiences doing remote and virtual learning, and then I asked them what it was like when students came back into the classrooms, and they all described a lot of, let's say, mischief. Let's just say mischief. The middle schoolers and high schoolers, like a lot of mischief and non-compliance with school rules. Whereas the elementary school kids, let me see if I can find this particular, this one what this one person shared, which was just like astonishing. Let me just,
While you're doing that, my daughter is an elementary teacher, and I was there while she was teaching at their cabin in her bedroom, and it was an amazing experience to watch her. She's since retired.
So when the teachers were teaching remotely,
Yeah.
they weren't in their classroom and going out from there, they were at home?
No,
on a
they were at
card
home.
table.
Okay, here we go. Here's a small excerpt.
Okay.
Here we go. It's not the one that I was originally looking for, but it answers your question. This person says, so I taught in a laundry room, which has no air conditioning, no heat, no nothing. But it was the only space. I have a picture of my setup if you want to see it. And yeah, the kids would say things to me like, oh, I see you switched to Tide. And I was like, yeah, Gain wasn't on sale, yeah. And I sat on an old piece of a high chair because I didn't have a stool and I was too scared to go into a store. So I took the top off and then I sat on it. Like it was elevated enough so I could, I just didn't want to go to the store and buy a stool, so that was my solution. And I had my laptop on the dryer. It was swanky.
Well, you answered what I was going to have as my next question. Is there any, both of my daughters.
Humor, yes.
Yes, both of my daughters are educators, and my son-in-law's a high school principal. And luckily now, what I remember from the pandemic are the funny stories.
Yes.
I mean, some of the things that happened were hilarious.
Yes.
So that's
Yes.
the humor that you need.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm looking, that was at one point where I'm like, I'm rereading everything to find every single funny story. And I think like the humor of it, like it is funny. It's funny, not funny, right? Like this teacher I had to teach in her laundry room, she found the humor in it. She made it into a joke, but by making it, into a joke, I think she captured the essence of the absurdity of the moment, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. I really try to keep all of the funny moments, and sometimes there's like, I actually think that Damn Yankees has a lot of humor in it. She was a character, right? And she was pretty funny. Some of the narrations, they're both, right? Like there's a funny bit in it, but then one sentence is funny and the next sentence is like not funny at all, right? Right. I want to see if I can find this. Well, thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure to meet you. Thank you.
Oh, I love the principal description.
Yeah.
Just about changing principles.
I wonder if these teachers coming back, the atmosphere has changed just politically. I mean, I just saw that some school wanted to put on the Crucible Was this in the New York Times?
It
today?
was
Yeah,
an article
yeah.
in the New York
And I
Times
think
about
you-
everything's being edited now.
Edited, and even
Yeah,
Dan
I know.
Yankees. I
I
could
know.
see schools saying,
Damn
whatever low,
Yankees.
yeah, and
Oh,
whatever
oh.
low
It's North
Lavards,
Carolina.
excuse me, we're not doing, you know,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just don't.
I know. So I really thought long and hard. I really refrained from asking anybody a question about politics per se. Some interviewees offered it up. And
In a good way.
in a way that basically said that their jobs were complicated because one teacher talked a lot about how she was living in a very conservative school district in North Carolina, so they didn't have any mask mandates, and that was very unnerving for her because she felt like her health was not being taken seriously, and she felt therefore as a teacher she was being disrespected. So that, fine, I feel like that needs to be captured because we need to be honest about how it's true. Teachers were quite disrespected. But I found this moment, this is a small bit, this is a scene that my titles are not great right now. It's not cleverly titled, it's called Returning to the Classroom. But this is an elementary school teacher. She says, okay, so I think one of the biggest things we saw when kids came back to school was that they were significantly less independent than what we were used to. I mean, first grade is little. They start the year at 6 years old, but there are some things you expect them to be able to do. Things like, how to go to the bathroom. Like, you use toilet paper and then you flush the toilet. You don't let it sit there, and you don't wait for me to come and wipe your bottom for you. Like, you can do it by yourself. And it was things like that. This is not something I had ever dealt with before, where kids didn't know how to use a bathroom. I had to show them. This is how you flush a toilet. This is how you use toilet paper. And this is how you should wipe and make sure it flushes. Oh, and make sure you close the door. Because I had a couple of kids who like to try to go to the bathroom with the door wide open. Okay? So that's I think one of the differences. And when we talk about the social losses, right? The younger kids that one of the people I interviewed, and I don't think this has not made it into this draft of the play, but she was a librarian, and she talked about students didn't know that when you put a book back on a bookshelf, you put it spine facing outward. They didn't learn that, right? So it's a lot of small things, a lot of small habits, right, that the younger kids were not inculcated into. One of the things that the school district, that my local school district, that both my kids were in, and a lot of these teachers taught in, they came up with a plan, the Do No Harm plan, which involved basically a lot of rules that did not put tremendous burdens on students. So basically they didn't have to attend class. If they attended on Zoom, they didn't have to have their cameras on, and they didn't have to speak. And there were no deadlines for assignments. So a student could hand in any assignment at any point in time, and the teacher was required to grade it. So if a student could do nothing the whole quarter and then the last day submit a bunch of assignments. Additionally, the lowest grade a student could get on a submitted assignment was a 50. They couldn't get zeros. There were no more zeros. Additionally, any student can make the choice to take any class, pass, fail. So,
What grade is this?
these were all grades. This was K-12.
Really?
All grades.
That was not the case here.
Wow.
It was crazy. This was the school district in which my kids, Charlotte Mecklenburg School District I think is one of the top 10 largest school districts in the country, and
it was the whole school district?
yes, this was the rule. Wow. And so what a lot of teachers spoke to me about was, so that was the year that students were going mostly remotely, 2020 to 2021. And teachers talked about then students came back and they're like, well, they're used to no deadlines. They're used to being able to hand things in whenever. And I have to tell you, as a college professor, they are still not used to it.
Really?
Administration would do it.
Why?
That seems so
It's
bizarre.
It was, you know, part of the do no harm. The idea was that, you know, you didn't know if and when a child was sick. You didn't know if and when their parent was sick. You could not account, like it could be that you could have a kid that was 10 and both of their parents were essential workers. You could have a kid that had a single parent family and that parent was ill and had no way to supervise that their kid was going to school, right? So there could be a lot of different permutations that would have resulted in kids not being able to finish their work on time, do the best job on their schoolwork, et cetera, et cetera.
No matter what their age.
Yeah.
There are older children.
That's right. So I'll tell you very personally, I had my, I have two sons. My older son was an 11th grader in March 2020.
That's the hard. Yeah.
That was hard. That was tough. But, you know, I was like, I'm sorry you are not taking any of your classes pass fail. You never share that piece of the recording. But he knew he could, which meant that all you have to do is get like a 70. And I was like, no. That is not for you. You live in a home, you have both your parents are here, as long, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We are here, you have Wi-Fi, there's absolutely no excuse for you to be taking the pass fails, you know? But boy, oh boy, you know, I knew it was hard for him to stay focused and motivated because his classmates were doing that.
Yeah.
His classmates were doing
Did
so.
it come back to bite them though, then when going to college applications?
My kid?
Or
My
the
kid,
other
no,
kids?
but I don't know. That's a good question. Not my kid, but I will say I think I think this is a question that probably could more rightly be answered by asking college professors what they've been seeing in their classrooms. And you know, I think I started this school year, the fall 2022 school year, still in a mode of give people grace. That was just my MO. You know, a student comes to me and tells me they're having a difficult time. Give people grace, give people grace. I'm gonna have to, I don't know what my fall 2023 is.
Dan,
I loved the scene that you read. I thought it was very, very good and very well read. And very much in the Anna DeVere Smith.
Right.
But I don't know documentary theater, and I'm having trouble picturing how the first three scenes that you described, which were not monologues,
Yes.
as I understand it, how are they theatrical?
That's a really good question. And that's not that's the director's responsibility. No, I'm not foisting that off. But I think what you ask is a really great question, because I think that's the challenge across the board for documentary theater is how are you making this material theatrical, right? So I've got a lot of ideas, and I think I had mentioned early on one of the things that I am the stage that I'm at, the information I need is whether or not there's a sense of like rhythm, right? Because I think that there is, in the way that some of the stories echo one another, what I've tried to do is go for kind of like a poetic rhythm where there's like, you know, some repetition and some echoes of voices. Does that make sense structurally?
I
That's
guess
the first
so.
piece.
I wasn't clear as you were telling it initially. In those first three scenes, are actors telling stories?
Yeah, so maybe you want me to, this will be hard, but maybe I'll just like read the opening bit. You want me to do that? I'll read the opening bit, and I'll just, you might not be able to do different voices for each actor, but I'll let you know, like actor one, whatever. We'll see. Maybe I can do different accents. So, oh gosh, I'll never forget my family. We were sitting at Duckworth's eating, and they had it on the TV, the school board meeting, I mean, and I just turned to my husband and I said, we're really not going back. Actor 2. March 13th was the day that we were told, kind of towards the afternoon, that, hey, you know what? you might want to, grab your laptop before you leave for the weekend. And, if there's some things that you really use a lot, you might want to grab those too. Actor 3. Woo! The fateful Friday the 13th. Actor 4. So we all left and we didn't come back. Woo! Gosh, I was teaching second grade. Oh no, I think I was teaching kindergarten. Leaving kindergartners? Oh gosh, you guys, I'm the huggy, feely, kiss them on the head type. I call them my children. I call them my darlings. I'm the one, all the children, they sit on my lap. God, it was devastating. Now we're back to actor 1 again. This is why it's a little bit hard when you get whatever. Okay, so at that time, it was just 2 weeks. So my idea for the theatricality is a little bit of it is you're ping-ponging back, right? And forth between the voices.
Are they all in the same room?
Sorry?
Are they all in the same room, the same
Are they
set?
all in the same space? They're all yes, all in the same space. But what else is happening on stage? I don't know. I have an idea that, I've written in notes for projection design, but beyond that,
I
lighting design,
I had never seen documentary theater until last summer, and I was told that these were all monologues. So, ignorant Carol, I thought that it would be first Beverly would stand up and do her monologue, and so on around, and then the show starts, and Beverly and I are on the same bench in the woods, and you're doing your monologue, and I'm doing my monologue, and somehow there's an intersection somewhere, which would be possible with this so much because it's the pandemic. That's the intersection. And I loved it. I mean, I came out liking it so much. I didn't even want to do, and it was fabulous. Just what you're doing right now is having everybody on the stage. And they're doing monologues, but they're broken up with one another. It was so powerful.
That's what I didn't understand.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's very theatrical.
And the broken up part of what I'm trying to find are moments where it's really interesting which voice follows which. So it's not, the sequencing isn't random, right? And how successful I've been with that, I need a group of actors to read so I can see that I've done what I am after.
And in this production, there were some times when only one person would be on stage and talking, and there were modest costuming, which like a scarf or a hat or something.
Yes.
I loved it. It was very powerful.
What was it called?
I don't know. I've forgotten the name. It was in Kansas, and it was people that had lived in this one county writing about life in Kansas. And it was on a place that you should apply, the Boland Store in the Flint Hills, and you could go and finish your work there.
Okay, well, I'll
give you that name.
Okay, that'd be wonderful. Thank you.
I think that's going to be very effective because you're conveying the information, setting it up, but you're doing it in character and in the voices and counterparting it.
Yeah, and hopefully it'll work too. One of the things that was interesting to me was some of the different perspectives based on the points the person was in their career. So we interviewed several people that were very early career teachers, like first, second, third, fourth year. And then we interviewed some folks that were closer to retirement. And, I'm sure that you all have already heard this, and statistics demonstrated as well, but that, there have been a lot of educators who have gone ahead and retired earlier than they originally thought they might. And in the duet that I mentioned, where it's two actors together, they are both, one was a guidance counselor and one was a high school teacher, and they both are talk about being 60 and thinking that they thought they were going to keep going, until they were 65, and now they're thinking, no way, there's no way. And that seems very important to me. And then, one of the other sentiments that was shared was this idea that if you've got a bunch of veteran teachers who are all going to retire early, and the number of young people entering the profession has sloughed off as a result of the pandemic, that puts so much additional pressure on those teachers that have remained, right? So the thing that I'm mulling over right now is, do I end on an up note or no? Like honestly, I'm. By the way, just so I'm an optimist. Like as a general, I don't mean about education, but as a human in the universe, I'm a very optimistic, very like positive thinking person. So I'm mulling it over. I don't want to Pollyanna it. I don't want to like end on a line where it's like, but all these bad things happen and it's gonna be fine. You know what I mean? But I also don't want to be fatalistic.
Well, the scene you read
Yeah.
ends on an up note.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we all take away, I mean, I
Yeah.
say that, like, we didn't know about Zoom before the pandemic, and now we can have meetings with people far
Right.
away.
I know.
So
That part.
there are good things.
There
that
are
came
silver
out of it.
linings.
Not
Yeah.
a lot, but
Yeah.
there are some.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely.
For the catching up
Yeah.
of kids, I remember learning that my father, who would have been in high school in the 20s, they had a thing at that time called a post-grad year. And sometimes people would do a 13th year at high school. And I remember one of the family friends saying she did it to take secretarial courses. So it was almost, I mean, there weren't junior colleges around then. He did it, I think, for sports. Another school recruited him. And so, because he was something. So anyway, but I wonder, you know, if they could give permission, in a sense, add a year to stay.
It is. I mean,
There's
it's
a shortage of teachers.
Yeah, with the
teachers.
shortage.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
Or you know, what needs to happen is somehow pay teachers to do some compensatory work, not expected to happen anyway. You know, some schools are trying out doing year-round school as a way to compensate for those learning losses. I don't
Some of them are doing
know.
extra tutoring.
Extra
I mean,
tutoring.
people are experimenting with ways to address some of the crises that the kids are in, and the learning as well. So, would you be happy ending on a down note?
No, I don't
Why
know.
not
So
like it yourself?
I don't know. You okay over there?
kind of-
I said about 20 minutes, half an hour to talk.
So I had like these three. There were three kind of bits that I was toying with as last bit. So you want me to just read those three in sequence? And I don't know. So I'll read those three in sequence. The first one is a long bit. So this last scene I've titled for right now "Legacy," and all of the quotes kind of mull over what will be the legacy of not just the pandemic, but this situation, both for students and for teachers. Oh gosh, you know what? I think it's going to reform education. I think that the Great Resignation in education is going to open people's eyes, and open the eyes of politicians and people in our community who make the decisions, because educators are being recruited now by all other types of sectors because of our work ethic. So I think that you're going to have to incentivize going into public education or going into education, and so it's got to reform. And so, you know, it's going to, I see I need to edit that, that's repetitive. So it's going to force some reform in some areas in order to have just retention of educators and, you know, appreciation for what we do. And it is unfortunate that it had to come, you know, from this, you know, at this point, but we are spiraling in a direction where there is so much pressure on our shoulders to carry the weight of everything. And even when we came back in the building, you know, before we first went out in the pandemic, parents were like, oh my gosh, I appreciate everything you guys do. This is so hard. But when we started having conversations about, well, when do we report back to school? They were like, well, those teachers need to get back to work, and well, they need to be back in the building, and you know, they need to be. And there's this demand, you know? And then teachers starting to think, well, you can't really tell me what I should do or how I should live my life, or that I should put my life in jeopardy or danger. And so, you know, I think that's where there's a shift. Educators are finally putting their foot down and saying, I did not come into this profession for that. I came in to educate your child. I came in to be a support to you and your child, but I'm not going to do all those other things. And I think that our wellness is becoming more of a priority for us, which is a good thing. Next actor. You know, I don't think it's the struggling that I'll remember. I think it was the unexpected moments of joy. I mean, just when you think it's impossible for anything positive, the children think it's wonderful. Next actor. Well, you know, I just hope that in the future, administrators and school boards and parents and communities will, you know, maybe respect teachers and the time that they put in, and know that it goes so much further for the typical teacher than what's in your contract, because we really do care about the kids.
Oh,
Mm. Yeah.
I like that ending. Yeah, that's great.
Did you interview any of the administrators?
Okay, so what a good question, Wendy. I was like this close to reaching out and just like asking principals, like straight up, please come talk to me. There was the principal, believe it or not, the principal of my kids' high school was a Davidson grad. And so she had gotten the flyer or the informational thing, and she contacted me and she said, thanks so much for this. I'll share this with my teachers. And I said, well, thank you so much. Please know that I'm interested in interviewing anyone involved in education or anyone who works for a school, yourself included.
really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wasn't surprised. I think that's really
Politically
difficult.
Especially locally.
Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
a principal in another district, another state.
Right.
Maybe so.
Far away.
I did interview several guidance counselors and special ed teachers who have different kinds of responsibilities in schools. So like weren't necessarily classroom teachers, right?
So are you done interviewing people then?
I feel like I am. I feel, that is a good question. I had thought about, do I want to do more interviews? But at some point I realized what I want is to write the play.
Yeah.
So I could keep interviewing people, but I want to write the play.
Yeah.
Also, I think you're getting further away from it.
Their
So
memories.
those emotions that we heard that you were just reading, I
Exactly.
think tamp down a little bit. And
Yeah.
if
I
you're a
completely
positive
agree.
person, you try to just remember the goodness and not the reality.
I think you're right on the
That's a
money
good
with
point.
that. Right on the money. Yep.
And is anyone going to know
Who's who?
which teacher
I don't
said which?
know. So okay, so that's also a really excellent question. The first thing is I promised anonymity. So you can see as my script just lists people as actor 1, actor 2, so there are no names. When I first got here, I needed to kind of keep track of what I was pulling from what. So I just used initials in my own personal draft, but that would never be part of any final whatever, right? I used initials. Then I kind of went through, and there's some spots where I had to tweak some information because I felt like it was too transparent and somebody might be identifiable. There's still, I don't know. There are a couple of stories. It's possible, right? That
Of damn Yankees.
that's the damn Yankees. It's totally possible from a local perspective. Now, all the teachers, part of my IRB approval, that's the Institutional Review Board. Any college, if you're going to conduct research that involves human subjects, you need to apply for approval and permission to conduct your research. So part of my research protocol involved a specific consent form, and the consent form says, I agree that Sharon may use the verbatim text from my interview in her play. Right? So I reminded them of this at the beginning and at the end of every interview. There was one interview that I conducted where a person shared a story, and almost immediately upon sharing the story, she said, I don't actually feel comfortable having shared that. Please, can you just delete that in some kind of way? And I said, absolutely. I'm articulating right now, so it'll be part of the transcript of your interview that we will make, I will excise this whole section from the interview, blah, blah, blah. But I wouldn't name towns or cities or, you know, things like that. Right now there's in the script that someone we interviewed lived in Arkansas, and I'm deciding what state I'm going to substitute.
Say a southern state.
It has to be something geographically in the middle, because she talks about what's happening in New York and California, and that they're in the middle. And I'm like,
Sorry.
yeah, it could be any. It could be, yeah, it could be a lot of other places. It could be a lot of places. There's one story where, you know, I interviewed this teacher, and I've included it in the play, but she talks about the fact that her kid goes to the same school that she's working at, and so her friends are her kid's teachers. So she's, you know, talks about how in the middle of the school day she gets a text saying, "Hey, did you know that your son's hiding under his blanket right now?" Right? You know, so that might be a recognizable piece of information, right? Like that kid might be like, "Oh shit," but she shared it, and she was fine, you know, with. I said, "Are you sure?" Then she said, "Yes." So it was okay, fine. So yeah.
I think it's excellent that apparently the protocol you followed was that you gave them the warning again after the interview.
Yes.
Did any of them want to see the transcript of their interview?
No, but they all were quite eager to know what was going to happen to the material, and I said, as soon as there's anything public, I'll be in touch with you. So I will expect that at the end of the summer, I'm going to reach out to everyone and just let them know, hey, I've got a draft, and we'll see what plans I'm able to make. I'd love to get my students just do a table read with me, but then what will happen next, I'm not sure.
So you'll advise some of them you wound up on the cutting room floor.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly. You know what? I would say that while there are some interviews that I didn't end up including any verbatim text, right? But I wouldn't say that they weren't significant in the creative process, because I learned a lot from all of the interviews. Everybody said something that shaped the way I thought, right? Yeah. And frankly, directed my attention. I had a list of questions. Again, I had some students who were working with me, so typically what I would do is I'd run the interview, and then at the conclusion of the interview, I would say to the person I was interviewing, if it's all right with you, I'm going to allow my students now to see if they have any other follow-up questions. And each of them usually would ask one. So some interviews did include some different questions, right? Mostly the different questions were follow-ups on things that they had shared in the process of the interview. Yeah.
Well, it is almost 5:30.
This has been wonderful.
And I think we could go on all night.
Project.
Thank you. Whoever read the applications, just the faith that you had in my project and in my description of the project, and you took a chance on letting me come out here and hang out in O'Neill's shadow for 2 weeks, and I'm just tremendously grateful.
How did this opportunity come to your attention?
I'm so glad you asked. In October of this year, I was a member of an external review team for the theater department at Davidson College, and Kate Bredeson and I went out to dinner at some point, and Kate said to me, "What are you working on, Sharon?" And I was like, "Well, I'll tell you what I'm working on, Kate." And I mentioned this project to her, and she's like, "Well, you should apply for a residency at Tao House this summer, because that will give you the uninterrupted time and focus that you need." And Kate, I guess, did a residency
Yes, she
here in
did.
2021.
Yes. Yeah.
And I was like, "Really? You think so, Kate?" And she said, "Oh, absolutely." And so that is how I found out about the opportunity and applied for it, was thanks to
Can you
Kate.
suggest to us other ways, aside from word of mouth, that we could get this opportunity better known?
I suppose that you could go through there are several professional organizations. Are you interested primarily in having folks who are writers and creating theatrical material? Yes.
I think
so.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. So I'd suggest there are several professional organizations that, you know, I come to it from the perspective, you know, more of a college professor. So I'm aware of the professional organizations that in which I'm involved, performances, and learn how to talk about and discuss and write critically about performance. And I had, again, it's sort of COVID related, but I had the thought, you know, the two constituencies that seemed to me to have experienced the most kind of isolation during COVID were senior citizens and and teenagers, right? And the social losses in those two constituencies, newspapers were reporting were the most dramatic. And so I had the idea that we could, in the class, what about if I created what I call an intergenerational dialogue group, and we partnered up with a local church, and the local church has a group, it's called something like Seniors Aging and Growing Together. And so I partnered with them, and each of the students in my class got a senior partner. And what we did was both constituencies, my class and the seniors, we all went to the theater together, and then the students had to take their senior partner out for coffee and talk with them about the performance. And we had generated in advance like a list of discussion prompts, but the idea was that the student was cultivating the skills of learning how to ask good questions and listen to the answers of those questions. Because those are things that I learned in my research were part of the learning losses, right? Was being able to engage socially, making eye contact. So many people told me that students have lost the skill of making eye contact and really listening and making eye contact. So they had to take their senior partner out for coffee, they had to listen, ask questions, and particularly be mindful of moments of difference when they had different reactions to the performance. And then the students had to write a reflection essay about this. And we did this 3 times throughout the semester. The whole group would go to see a show. The next week, the student would take their senior partner out for coffee, and they would have a conversation. And it was a huge hit. It was a hit.
I love the intergenerational part
The
of it.
intergenerational part. So the reflection essays always, for me as a teacher, are a great venue for me to see how things are working as we're going along. So they would have coffee with their partner, and the next week they'd hand the reflection paper in so I could read it before the next iteration. So if there were problems or issues, whatever. A student said to me in their reflection essay, I realize that the only senior citizen with whom I've ever had a conversation is my grandma. My grandma. And they said, I suddenly realized I don't talk to people of that generation if they're not part of my family.
Well, that's awesome. That's great.
Fantastic.
Right? And I was like, wow, what an interesting insight. And yeah, so I'm going to do some other iteration of that, but to me it felt like what I'll call a COVID response, right? Part of the pedagogical response to things that I learned in this research, right? That I was able then to apply it.
But
in
it
the
transcends
classroom.
COVID too. I mean, that's
Sorry.
something it's not just COVID. I mean,
It's not.
That's
Yes,
great.
I agree. That was what I realized. It does. You're right. It does transcend. It transcends COVID. So.